Can you imagine being humiliated in front of your entire family, only to smile, knowing a secret that could shatter their illusion of power? I'm Allison Chamberlain, a Manhattan marketing exec who was once the family underdog. Until one night, over foie gras and vintage wine, my sister mocked me and my parents laughed. That was their first mistake. Their second, forgetting who taught me how to polish diamonds and who stayed behind cleaning workshop floors while they chased success. They thought they buried me. But I was just learning how to rise. Stick around. What happens after that dinner? Let's just say no one saw it coming. The clink of crystal, the glint of candlelight, the echo of laughter, everything about that night screamed perfection. My mother's Upper East Side dining room always had a performance quality to it, like life staged for a luxury catalog. But beneath the baccarat sparkle and bone china, something colder simmered. It was the annual Chamberlain family dinner. My younger sister Kelly, flawless, smug, arrived 30 minutes late and kissed everyone like a socialite on parade. She hadn't changed since prep school. She still smelled like gardenias and superiority. I, on the other hand, had just come straight from a client pitch in Tribeca. My black wool coat still clung to the scent of subway air. Before I could hang it up, Kelly spotted me. "Still ride the bus," she quipped, her smile sharp enough to slice through satin. Everyone laughed, of course, except me. I simply peeled off my gloves and draped my coat over the back of my chair. "I like to be among the people," I said lightly. "It keeps me grounded." Mother sipped her wine with the grace of someone preparing a dagger. "Success isn't for everyone, dear." I didn't flinch. That line had lived in my bones since high school, when I'd begged to apply for a summer abroad program, and she said, "Why waste that kind of opportunity on someone who doesn't shine?" That night, I came prepared. Dinner was an exhibition of wealth, lobster bisque followed by lamb medallions, paired with a Syrah flown in from the Rhone Valley. The conversation swirled around gallery openings, hedge fund rumors, and Kelly's latest strategic pivot from finance to interior design. Then my father's stoic, cautious Gregory Chamberlain finally looked my way. He wasn't a man easily startled, but something in his gaze shifted. His eyes weren't on my face. They were on my neck. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice low. Kelly turned and her smile faltered. Around my neck, resting like ice against skin, was a dazzling vintage necklace. Edwardian, platinum filigree, sapphires like glacier cuts. I'd worn it deliberately. "Oh," I said, tracing the pendant. "Just a little trifle, something I picked up last season." Father's hand tightened around his wine glass. "That piece," he whispered, almost to himself. "It can't be." But it was. I knew exactly what it was. Knew the drawer he kept it in, tucked away from public view like a regret. It once belonged to his mother. He told me I'd never be responsible enough to inherit it. Now it was mine, legally, quietly, permanently, and the look on his face when I leaned back and smiled, that was the appetizer. My, Kelly said tightly. "Didn't know you had taste." "Oh, Kelly," I murmured. "There's so much you don't know." In that moment, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I wasn't the girl who scrubbed jewelry benches with bleeding hands after hours. I wasn't the one they called too sensitive when I asked for fairness. I was Allison Chamberlain, and I had just shattered the illusion they clung to. They wanted to believe I was still beneath them, but I'd outgrown the floor and the shadows. Back in my Brooklyn loft, the kind with exposed brick and crooked charm, I peeled off the glamour like old armor. The necklace, still ice cold, rested on my coffee table beside a half-finished glass of Barolo. Its sapphires glinted like secrets I'd kept too long. My phone buzzed on the counter. Family group chat. "Great dinner, Kelly." "Allison, serving drama like always, Cousin Reed." "Where'd you get that necklace, though?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, the messages blurring into a smear of digital noise. They didn't know what that necklace had cost me, not in money, but in memory. I sank into my old velvet armchair, the one I rescued from a flea market during grad school, and scrolled back through older messages. Birthday photos without me. Inside jokes from a family vacation I was never invited to. Pictures of Kelly's promotions, new shoes, new hairstyles. Me, silent reactions, barely a mention. But I remembered everything. The soft sound of jewelry tumblers in the factory basement. The smell of polish. The ache in my wrists after hours scrubbing gold dust from tiled floors. I was 17, and while Kelly spent summers abroad finding herself, I was the invisible daughter pushing a mop behind the men with degrees. "Let her learn work ethic," Dad used to say. What he meant was, let her learn her place. I was the only one who stayed behind after closing hours. The only one who cared enough to sweep the corners no one looked at. I'd take a bus back to our suburban house, fingers raw, shoes stained, while Kelly clicked her heels through rooftop lounges. She got the new textbooks, the easier chores, Dad's attention. I got dust and silence, and yet I never stopped working, not even when they made me feel like effort was an embarrassment. I pushed through night classes, paid off student loans early, and landed my first job without so much as a congratulations. But the part they never asked about, how I made it here. Because while they watched Kelly post her curated victories, I was building something quieter, stronger, invisible maybe, but real. Still holding my phone, I opened a different folder, one titled Proof. Inside were screenshots, stock purchases, shell corporations, investor contacts, quiet moves, careful strategy. 5 years of patience of buying slices of Chamberlain and Co. behind curtains they never noticed. Their family business, their legacy, soon to be mine. I poured another glass of wine and looked out over the twinkling Brooklyn skyline. I could still hear Kelly's voice in my head, sickly sweet. Still ride the bus? Yes, sometimes I still ride the bus. And sometimes I drive the route. That night I dug through a shoebox at the back of my closet. It still held my old workshop apron, stiff with age. I hadn't touched it in years, but I'd kept it like a scar. Folded inside was a letter. My application for the Chamberlain internship I was overqualified for but never granted. Instead, they gave it to a cousin who dropped out of business school halfway through. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't cry. I just stared at the fading ink until the resolve curled tight in my chest like a spring. They'd always underestimated me. And now, they'd remember me. Mornings in my office were a ritual grind, pour review, French press, dark roast, a splash of oat milk, then screen on, focus sharp. But that morning, my usual confidence had a new edge, satisfaction, not joy, just the quiet calm of seeing a plan unfold. The Chamberlain and Co. ticker blinked at the bottom of my second monitor, red arrow dragging downward. 3% drop since the quarterly filing. I sipped my coffee and smiled. They hadn't even noticed the bleed yet. Not really. They were too busy propping up a rotting facade. Kelly's influencer deals, my mother's charity galas, my father's stubborn insistence that legacy couldn't be disrupted. But the market didn't care about legacies, especially not ones built on outdated taste and dusty vaults. I clicked open the folder titled Equity Channels. It listed every holding company I'd built over 5 years. All separate, all clean. Nothing directly tied to me, yet each one traced back through silent investment firms I'd consulted for, firms that trusted my taste, my strategy, my discretion. With every contract I signed in my consulting career, I took a tiny cut and invested it back into the family firm, not out of love, but out of calculation. They didn't know that while they mocked my independence, I was buying pieces of their empire one whisper at a time. When Dad asked if I wanted shares at the last family meeting, I'd said, "Why waste it on someone not in the core business?" He smirked, relieved. And I left that meeting knowing I already owned 6%. That number had quietly grown. 8, 9, 12. Most people don't realize how much control you can gain from minority stakes if you understand debt leverage and board voting dynamics. I learned that while my family learned to ignore me. The funniest part, they still thought I was just a marketing consultant who dabbled in design, that I floated from project to project with no real direction. But I was building something bigger than legacy. I was building leverage. I leaned back in my chair and opened another tab. An internal Chamberlain memo leaked to one of my contacts. Vendor disputes, delayed shipments, cash flow inconsistencies. The same weaknesses I had watched take root years ago when Dad refused to digitize operations or hire outside auditors. He said tradition would hold. I said nothing. The day he refused my recommendation to modernize their CRM, he said, "This isn't your lane, Allison." And I nodded, as if agreeing, then went home and bought another 0.5% through a silent partner. I had spent years buried beneath their indifference. And now, I was the one watching the foundation crack from above. But this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about validation. Because even now, after the dinner, after the necklace, after the rising curiosity in our family group chat, no one had picked up the phone to ask how I was doing. Not even to fake concern. I minimized the stock window and opened the press release I'd been drafting for weeks. Legacy meets innovation, a quiet revolution in jewelry investment. It was a bland headline, perfectly corporate, but the story would land hard once it dropped, especially when the firm behind it was revealed as a major stakeholder in Chamberlain & Co., and especially when that firm appointed me to its board. They thought they knew the shape of ambition, my sister in her curated brunch posts, my mother in her antique obsession, my father in his iron grip on the past. But ambition can wear a quiet face. It can ride the bus, wear last season's boots, and drink cheap espresso while orchestrating your downfall. I glanced back at the ticker. Another drop, 5%. They still hadn't noticed, but I had, and I was counting. The message pinged in just past midnight, time stamped in Swiss precision. Subject: inquiry regarding advisory partnership, urgent. It came from a luxury collector I'd once consulted for, a discreet Geneva-based group known for acquiring and reselling rare pieces through private channels. Old money quiet. The kind of client who never showed their cards unless the table was already theirs. I opened the email expecting a follow-up question on the Cartier acquisition I'd helped them land last quarter. Instead, I blinked twice at the line in bold. We're extending an invitation to join our investment board. Your strategic instincts are exactly what we need. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Then I read it again, me, on their board. Not because I was a Chamberlain, not because I inherited a name, but because I'd earned it. Word had spread. My predictions about the artisan market, my custom forecasting dashboards, tools I'd built in silence had become gospel in their inner circle. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't answer right away, not out of hesitation, out of reverence. This moment, this was mine. I thought of Kelly, her Insta stories drenched in faux-neutral aesthetics and backhanded captions like family, the ones who know you best and forget you first. I thought of Mother's last comment, success isn't for everyone, Allison. Then I thought of that factory, the smell of melting silver, the way Dad once handed me a brush instead of a blueprint, and I smiled. At 12:18 a.m. I typed, I accept the offer, kindly forward next steps. Then I stared at the reply, the confirmation, the digital signature that told me, this door is now open. The world shifted just slightly. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the city lights from my fire escape, wrapped in a cardigan older than Kelly's business ventures. My bare feet dangled over Brooklyn's edge as I imagined their faces, not when I told them, but when they read it in a press release they weren't meant to understand. Because here's the truth. Validation feels different when it comes from strangers. Cleaner, sharper. It doesn't carry the pity of relatives or the weight of expectations. It doesn't ask you to explain why you were missing from the group photo or why you never came home for Easter. It just says, we see you. And I had never felt so seen. In the morning, I returned to my desk, my inbox suddenly warmer. Congratulatory notes from other investors. A pending invite to a high-end art curation panel. A personalized gift from the Geneva team, a vintage pen once owned by a silent-era jewelry historian, because we noticed your attention to detail. I held it like an heirloom. The family chat was buzzing too, but about other things. Kelly's new interior design collab, sponsored clearly. Cousin Toby's failed engagement. Mother's latest charity auction scandal. I didn't comment, didn't even react. Instead, I posted one photo on my private profile, a snapshot of the pen on top of an old Chamberlain catalog. Captioned simply, some write history, some rewrite it. It got 2 likes, from strangers, and that was enough. Because this was the turning point. For years, I had been waiting for them to recognize me. Now I realized I didn't need them to. I was no longer waiting to be seen by a table that was never built for me. I was already building my own. It began with a whimper wrapped in pretense. A slick interview on a niche luxury blog. My father's face, oddly pallid under studio lights, smiling beside Kelly in the lobby of Chamberlain & Co. The caption reading, Crafting Legacy in the Age of Disruption. The article tried hard, waxing poetic about generational artisanship and family-run resilience. But buried deep in the final paragraph was the truth. Sources suggest the brand is weathering internal restructuring amid liquidity questions. They always bury the rot at the bottom. Within a week, the whispers turned to thunder. First, a mid-tier supplier backed out. Then a Swiss boutique pulled Chamberlain pieces from their spring catalog. Their PR firm released a rushed statement citing temporary restructuring. But the markets read between the lines. Their stock faltered, then dipped, then wobbled like a crown about to fall. And suddenly my family remembered I existed, not with a phone call, not even an apology, but through Kelly. Her post landed like a dripping faucet in a silent room, loud in its desperation. A sepia-toned photo of her standing at the factory's ornate front gates, wind, tousled hair, dramatic shadows. Some things are worth fighting for. Support our family's legacy. Small businesses need your voice. Save Chamberlain and Co. She tagged me, Allison, the invisible one, the bus rider, the overthinker who never quite fit into their polished story. I stared at the notification like it was a dare. Had she forgotten the necklace, the silence, the years of watching me sweep floors while she wore velvet at galas? No, she hadn't forgotten. She just assumed I'd forgotten myself. I let her post sit for exactly 3 hours. Then I posted something of my own. A single image, a close-up of my hands, not manicured, not posed, just real. Working hands, steady, deliberate, holding an old jewelry file from the workshop, one I'd kept after all these years. Caption simply, "Some inherit jewelry, others learn to make it shine." No hashtags, no names, just the truth, quiet and sharp. The reaction was swift. Messages from colleagues, past clients, even quiet investors I hadn't spoken to in years. This gave me goosebumps. That's how you speak with power. Tell me this is a Chamberlain clapback. I didn't confirm or deny. Silence speaks louder when you've earned it. But in the family group chat, absolute chaos. Kelly's post had ignited a firestorm. Uncles and cousins chimed in with panicked curiosity. Mother sent links to articles from questionable journalists defending the brand's legacy. One aunt tagged me with a passive-aggressive, "Maybe it's time to come home, Allison." I muted the chat. No response, no explanation, just distance. They still thought this was about grudges, about some emotional tantrum I'd eventually outgrow. What they didn't understand was this wasn't about revenge. This was about control. This was about watching a house fall from the inside and already owning the deed before it hits the ground. Later that evening, I walked past a boutique in Soho that once refused to carry my designs. Now, in its window, sat a delicate ring I designed last year, placed front and center, tagged as part of a new wave collection acquired by Geneva's finest. No mention of me, of course, but I didn't need credit anymore, just the view. Because sometimes the most satisfying thing isn't being seen, it's watching the people who erased you finally realize they wrote the wrong ending. The call came on a Monday. Rain tapping my office windows like the universe was trying to eavesdrop. I almost didn't answer. My phone buzzed against the lacquered walnut of my desk, Dad Mobile lighting the screen in sterile gray. The name felt unfamiliar, like a contact I forgot to delete after a professional networking event. I let it ring once, twice. Then curiosity won. I tapped accept and waited. No greeting, just breathing. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard in years, not the booming boardroom tone, not the cold disciplinarian, but a voice stripped of armor, he said, "Allison, we need a miracle." I said nothing, not out of cruelty. I wanted to see how far he'd go without prompting. He took the pause as permission. "Our liquidity's gone," he continued. "We lost a German buyer, 2 of our largest wholesalers canceled their spring orders, and there's chatter about improprieties. You know how these rumors spiral. Rumors spiral. An elegant phrase for a downfall he authored himself. He coughed, then went on. "Kelly's done her best, and your mother, well, she's trying to keep the press calm, but we need capital, Allison. Substantial capital. You've always had a knack for outside-the-box solutions." There it was, the invitation back into the fold. Not an apology, not a reckoning, an assumption that I'd still jump at the chance to be helpful, to be relevant in a narrative they crafted, where I played the role of the eager understudy, always waiting to be called on stage. "Gregory," I said finally, using his first name like he was a vendor I barely trusted. He flinched at the sound. I could hear it. "Have you considered asset liquidation?" I asked smoothly, clicking open the Chamberlain financials on my second screen. "The Geneva showroom alone could net 7 figures at auction if stripped properly. That showroom is part of the Chamberlain identity," he snapped. Ah, there he was, the father I remembered, polished, proud, blind. "It's just marble and bad lighting," I replied. He hesitated, tone faltering again. "I was hoping we could talk seriously, family to family." I looked out the window, the city blurred, skyscrapers weeping into the fog. You didn't think of me as family when you split the firm's board between Kelly and our cousins. That was a business decision, he said too quickly. So is this, I said and hung up. No rage, no ultimatum, just a dial tone in a silent room. I sat back and exhaled. Years ago, I'd have cried after a call like that. I would have played the conversation over in my head, wondering what I could have said differently to prove my worth. But now, I felt nothing but clarity. The truth was, they hadn't called me because they respected my mind. They called because their ladder was breaking, and they remembered I once swept the floors beneath it. That evening, I sat with my lawyer and financial advisor in a private room at a Tribeca firm. Papers spread before us, signatures highlighted in blue. The buyout process had begun months ago. Quietly, strategically, each step calculated to avoid detection. I'd acquired voting rights through layered entities, companies I helped fund, peers I trusted, clients who owed me favors. Now it was time. I initialed the top page, felt the pen sink into the paper like a final verdict, then signed my name in full, Allison Elise Chamberlain. Congratulations, my lawyer said, sliding the documents into a sleek leather folder. You're about to become the majority stakeholder. No champagne, no applause, just the cold thrill of vindication. They had wanted a miracle, but miracles don't come from prayer. They come from patience. And mine had finally matured. The voice message came just after sunrise. Kelly. Her name pulsed on my lock screen like an old injury flaring up in damp weather. I stared at the notification for a while before pressing play. Hey, Allison. The silence after her greeting was the most honest part. I know you're probably still angry, I get it, she continued, her tone hushed, too practiced to be truly raw. But I've been thinking about everything, and I think we both know this feud, or whatever you want to call it, it's gotten out of hand. I poured coffee slowly, listening as if her words were background noise. You've proven your point. You've built your own life. Everyone sees that now, okay? So maybe it's time we stop fighting and fix what's broken, together. Together, like we were equals, like I hadn't been her punchline for most of my adult life. She wasn't done. Dad's not doing great, and Mom's losing her mind trying to keep the press at bay. You know how she is. Honestly, you're probably the only one who can actually fix this. You're good at that, at making things work. I smiled coldly. Even now, buried beneath a crumbling legacy, she still framed it as my talent for repair, not the years of damage they caused. Kelly's voice softened further, almost whispered. I remember you used to talk about rebuilding the Chamberlain brand from the inside out. You used to scribble ideas on napkins. I was jealous, of how your brain worked. I never told you that. I paused, mug halfway to my lips. Jealousy, a new card. And, she added as if it cost her something, I'm sorry. For some things, for how we made you feel. Some things, how we made you feel, not what we did, not what she did. The message ended with a sigh and 5 words I never expected from her. Please don't leave us behind. I replayed that line 3 times, not for emotion, for precision, because that was the root of their fear, not that the company might collapse, but that I might rise without them. Later that morning, as I sat across from my lawyer and financial advisor, I barely mentioned the voicemail. Instead, I reviewed legal drafts, scrutinized asset transfer clauses, and clarified restructuring language. My focus stayed on ink and numbers. But as I initialed a document authorizing the launch of a formal corporate buyout, I allowed myself a thought. They never believed I'd have power. Now they couldn't stop asking for it. By evening, the buyout papers were filed, and I didn't return Kelly's call. Not because I hadn't heard her, but because I had better things to do. The next day, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Manhattan, I met with a team of analysts and branding experts. We talked not about saving Chamberlain and Co., but about transforming it. Their words were sharp, clinical. Excess vintage stock, outdated CRM, deadweight positions in marketing, name recognition but fading relevance. All solvable, all scalable, all mine to decide. I wasn't just planning to fix a failing business. I was planning to redefine its legacy, with or without the people who thought I didn't deserve to hold a pen. That night, while reviewing a potential rebrand deck, I paused to check my notifications. Kelly had sent another message, not a voicemail, just a single line of text. Let's be sisters again, please. I stared at it, then locked my phone, because some bridges don't burn, they crumble. When the people on the other side refuse to build them properly. The headline hit before dawn. Chamberlain and Co. acquired by silent consortium. Insider restructuring expected. Below it, buried in the finer print, my name appeared. Once, bold, unmistakable. Led in part by investment strategist Allison Chamberlain, whose role in the family business has remained largely private until now. Within 20 minutes, my phone turned into a panic device. Missed calls, voicemails, emails marked urgent, a LinkedIn request from a vendor I hadn't spoken to since my internship. Even my doorman said a woman matching Kelly's description tried to drop off something important. By the time I reached the office, the air already felt electric. I wore navy wool and silence, heels sharp as memory. No makeup, just war paint in restraint. At exactly 10 o'clock, I stepped into the boardroom of Chamberlain & Co. for the first time in 9 years. 12 men and women sat in a semicircle, some family, some long-time investors, a few shaken executives who now realized their equity just shifted power. Kelly was already there. She stood when I entered, eyes wide with disbelief and something else. Panic, hope. I didn't care enough to parse it. My father sat beside her, jaw locked tight. His hands were folded too neatly, knuckles taut with a tremble he tried to disguise. The room fell quiet as the board chair. A woman I'd met only once during an alumni fundraiser rose and addressed the group. As of this morning, Ms. Allison Chamberlain holds a controlling interest in Chamberlain & Co. Her consortium has met every threshold required for restructuring rights. She has called this emergency meeting to announce leadership transition. I didn't smile, didn't blink, just stood, calm, prepared. I let silence wrap around the table like velvet rope. Then I spoke. I've spent years studying this company, its market flaws, its branding collapse, its unwillingness to evolve. I submitted proposals. I was ignored. I offered ideas. They were laughed at. Kelly flinched. Father blinked. I am not here for revenge, I continued. I am here for responsibility, something this family misdefined as loyalty. Kelly stood abruptly. You can't just take over. This isn't your revenge arc. This is our family's legacy. I tilted my head. Legacy built on what? The last 5 years of stagnant earnings? Or the factory workers laid off after your influencer rebrand campaign? Her mouth opened, then closed. The board chair cleared her throat. Ms. Chamberlain Kelly, under restructuring terms, your sister holds authority over all leadership roles pending compliance review. Kelly's voice rose. I have a finance degree. I didn't move, just said, then finance the revival yourself. Gasps echoed. A few board members exchanged stunned glances. My father stood slowly, the oldest trick in his arsenal, dignity through posture. This is betrayal, he said flatly. This is structure, I replied. You built a house on favoritism and pretended it was stone. I'm just replacing the beams. His gaze didn't waver, but his voice dropped. I gave you everything. No, I said, you gave me the broom. And I built a blueprint. He stormed out, the old pride in his spine cracking as he passed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one by one, people began nodding. The new era had begun, not with a press conference, but with a daughter reclaiming the table they never set for her. The Chamberlain estate sat on 2 acres of curated arrogance, polished limestone columns, a winding driveway lined with imported dogwoods, everything designed to impress, to declare a kind of brittle, old money permanence. I hadn't stepped foot there in almost 4 years. But that morning, as I stepped out of the town car in tailored black, the gates didn't feel imposing. They felt ornamental. Inside, the air smelled like lemon wax and resentment. The formal living room had been hastily transformed into a war room. A long table, stacked folders, untouched tea. Kelly was already seated, dressed like she'd Googled CEO chic on the way over. Charcoal blazer, overly dramatic shoulder pads, lips trembling behind nude gloss. Mother sat beside her, pearls tight at her throat, hands folded like she was at a funeral. Father entered last. His suit was rumpled, his eyes older. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the mantel, watching me like I was an intruder in his private museum. The new board chair, Diana Abrams, stood calmly. We'll begin now. A pause. Then she turned toward the room. As of today, we officially recognize Allison Chamberlain as CEO of Chamberlain & Co. The words landed with finality. Mother gasped. Kelly shot up. This isn't how it's supposed to be. I've been here. I've done the work. You can't just waltz in and... I didn't waltz, I cut in, my voice crisp. I built quietly, thoroughly, legally. She scoffed, brushing her bangs behind her ear. This isn't about the company. This is about you needing attention. I let that hang in the air, then reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim portfolio. This is a 12-month revitalization plan. Market realignment, staff restructuring, digital expansion. We've partnered with 2 firms already, both approved by majority vote. Everything's outlined here. Kelly didn't reach for it. Mother finally spoke. I don't understand how you could do this to your own family. That word again, family. They always summoned it when the consequences finally arrived. This company nearly collapsed under your leadership, I said quietly. You were too busy curating a fantasy of elegance while the foundation rotted. You chose image over infrastructure, appearances over action. Mother's face hardened, but she said nothing. I turned to Kelly. If you want a seat on the finance team, submit your credentials. We're restructuring, not coddling. Her jaw dropped. Father finally pushed off the mantle, slow and heavy. This is humiliation. No, I said, eyes steady. This is balance. He met my gaze for a long moment. Something flickered there, recognition maybe, or the grim understanding that the reins he gripped for decades now belonged to the one he ignored. He didn't argue, just walked out. This time there was no dramatic slam, just the sound of leather soles on marble. Diana gave a small nod. Board recognizes all leadership shifts, meeting adjourned. The room emptied slowly. Kelly lingered the longest. As she gathered her bag, she said, "This isn't over." I smiled, just slightly. "Good," I said. "Let's hope your work ethic outlasts your tantrum." Outside, the wind picked up, sending brittle leaves skittering across the driveway. As I stepped into the waiting car, I looked back at the house, not as a daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who had outgrown every room inside. They'd made me feel like a guest in their empire. Now I held the keys. The message came through internal email, no subject line, no preamble. Just an attached document with Chamberlain and Co. letterhead and a familiar clipped signature at the bottom, Gregory Chamberlain. The document named Kelly as a consultant in residence, granting her provisional access to all internal financial systems. I stared at it for a long moment. So this was it. The last move from the man who used to decide who mattered and who mopped the floors. A quiet end run around policy. He'd printed a title, wrapped it in legacy paper. Tried to sneak her in the side door while pretending the front was locked. I forwarded the message to HR. Then I waited. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Chamberlain, HR just blocked an entry attempt at the building. It was Kelly with an outdated badge." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The systems were working. Every protocol I'd put in place cleanly, legally, was holding. Background checks, onboarding verification. Role validation through new cloud security tiers. She couldn't just exist inside the company anymore. She had to earn a role just like anyone else. And she hadn't. She'd assumed the old rules still applied, that a name, a nod, a father's printed page could override structure. But that era was over. An hour later, I watched the security footage on my laptop. Kelly at the front desk. Designer trench, furious eyes. She pointed at her phone, tried to talk her way in. But the receptionist, professional and unmoved, just shook her head and gestured to the HR notice. Policy was airtight. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just watched her turn away, shoulders tight, the wind catching her coat as she stormed back through the lobby. The next day, the family group chat was silent. Not even Mother posted a passive-aggressive poem or quote. They had gone still, processing, perhaps, or regrouping. I didn't check again. Instead, I met with our operations lead to discuss hiring protocols for our new downtown expansion. 2 candidates had already applied, both from outside the family, both with real credentials. We reviewed their portfolios. We discussed future partnerships. We never mentioned Kelly. That evening, from my office in the new executive suite, glass walls, steel trim, everything they never let me touch, I watched the skyline ripple with lights. I thought about the factory. About sweeping floors with bleeding hands. About the time I asked Dad to let me shadow the jewelers and he said, "Design's not your lane, sweetheart. Some people just keep things running." I believed him for too long, until I realized the ones who keep things running are often the only ones who understand where the real power lies. I reached for the framed photo on my desk, one I'd taken at age 21, black and white, a shot of my hands holding a raw stone from the workshop floor. The caption I'd once scrawled across the bottom, "Beauty begins in grit." I had kept that photo through every apartment, every disappointment, every silent Sunday with unanswered calls. Now it sat framed beside an award from Geneva's board, Innovator of the Year. The contrast made me pause, not out of nostalgia, out of certainty. This was the life I built, grain by grain, cut by cut. Not for revenge, for recognition. Not from them, from myself. The boardroom smelled like new leather and clean decisions. Sunlight washed across the floor to ceiling windows, cutting sharp angles on polished glass. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick with understanding. Final, unquestioned. I sat at the head of the table, my table, and across from me my father. He didn't speak right away. He hadn't since entering. No theatrics this time, no raised voice or threats. Just an old man sitting where power used to live. His tie was uneven, his hair uncombed. In his hands, a folded document, creased from too much holding, too much doubt. It was his final maneuver. He tried to push Kelly through one more time. A forged document rooted to finance, authorizing her re-entry under a temporary compliance review. No one was supposed to catch it, but the new system did. 3 red flags, signature mismatch, timestamp conflict. HR shut it down before it reached implementation. I hadn't said anything when the alert came through. I just waited. And this morning he came in person. He set the paper on the table between us like an offering or a confession. Then he looked at me not like a father, not even like a rival, like a man who finally understood the math. "You left no cracks," he said. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't admiring, it was factual. I nodded. "You taught me not to." We sat there, history laid bare in the quiet between us. The years of overlooked birthdays, of praises rerouted, of mops and mockery. All folded into one unspoken truth. He never thought I'd make it here. Not because I lacked potential, but because he never bothered to see it. "Kelly's struggling," he said, more to himself than to me. "She'll be fine," I replied. "Once she learns to apply herself to something real." He winced, but didn't argue. I waited, expecting one last plea, some nostalgic pull. Instead, he stood, slowly, carefully. "Your grandfather wouldn't have recognized this company," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "Then he'd probably be proud of it." He blinked, hesitated, and then nodded just once, then left. Not a storm out, not a collapse, just the soft closing of a door that had stayed open too long. That afternoon, I visited the factory. It was quieter now, most of the staff working remotely or in satellite studios. But the main floor still smelled like metal and polish, like memory. I found the bench I used to clean around. The same one where I once watched artisans file stones by hand while I scrubbed the floor behind them. This time I sat, took out the design sketches I'd hidden for years, drawings they once laughed at or ignored. I handed them to our head jeweler, a woman I hired last quarter. "These," I said, "are our next collection." She scanned the papers, her eyes lighting up. "You designed these," I nodded. "They're based on fractures," I said. "How pressure creates beauty." That night I stood in the glass office. My name on the door, my story no longer rewritten but newly written. The family didn't call. There were no more voice messages, no posts, no press rebuttals, only silence. But it wasn't hollow. It was full of what they finally understood. Outside, the city shimmered in late spring light. The streets below pulsed with ambition, with hunger, with dreams people built for themselves when no one handed them the map. I picked up the vintage pen from Geneva and signed one last document that day, one that added my name as lead designer for the upcoming collection. I wasn't just CEO, I was the maker now, and the hush that followed, it wasn't fear, it was respect.